She stood at the iron gates, their cold bars twisting upward, like silent sentinels guarding a world far beyond her reach. Before her stretched the vast driveway, flanked by ancient oaks, whose branches whispered secrets only the wind could understand. The mansion loomed ahead, its stone walls glinting faintly under the pale morning light, a fortress of wealth and solitude. Her footsteps were tentative on the gravel path, each crunch echoing softly in the stillness. The air was heavy with an unfamiliar scent, polished wood, expensive leather, and something distant, like forgotten memories held captive within these walls. She clutched her thin coat tighter around her shoulders, not from cold, but from the chill of uncertainty that had settled deep inside her chest. The girl's eyes traced the ornate carvings on the front door, their intricate patterns telling stories she had never been told. This was a place unlike any she had known, a world of quiet opulence, where silence filled every corner and shadows seemed to listen. Her heart raced, a fragile bird trapped beneath ribs too tight to let it soar freely. Inside, the air was cooler. Still, the heavy door closed behind her with a muted thud, sealing her fate within the mansion's labyrinth. Marble floors stretched beneath her feet, reflecting the soft glow of crystal chandeliers hanging high above. The walls, draped in deep velvet curtains, absorbed sound, leaving only the faintest whisper of her presence. Then, he appeared, a figure carved from stone and shadow. The millionaire. His gaze was sharp, his posture rigid, like a man who had built walls around himself as impenetrable as the mansion's fortress. He studied her with eyes that held no welcome, only the cold appraisal of one who had long ceased to expect warmth. She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat a stubborn reminder of the dreams she dared to chase. "I'm here to work," she said quietly, her voice barely more than a breath. The words hung between them, fragile and uncertain, like a tentative step into an unknown future. There was no smile, no gesture of kindness, only the weight of silence, pressing down, reminding her that here, she was nothing more than a visitor in a world not built for her. Yet beneath that silence, something stirred, a flicker of hope, faint but persistent, like a candle flickering against the night. She glanced around the grand hallway once more, taking in the portraits of stoic ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. The heavy scent of old wood and fading memories filled her lungs as she steadied herself. This house, with all its wealth and coldness, was now her world, a place where she must find strength in stillness and courage in silence. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying whispers of change, and within her, the quiet resolve to endure, to belong, and to survive. The first step had been taken into a strange house, into an uncertain future, where a poor girl would learn that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with fists, but with the fragile hope that refuses to break. Late into the stillness of the mansion's endless night, a sound slipped through the thick walls, soft, fragile, yet impossibly piercing. A baby's cry. It wasn't loud or frantic. Instead, it carried the weight of loneliness, a haunting melody woven from silence and longing, like a secret that refused to stay hidden. The sound fluttered in the air, fragile and trembling, as if begging to be heard by someone who might understand. She had heard many sounds in this house, the cold ticking of the grandfather clock, the distant rustle of curtains, the faint hum of the city beyond the gates, but nothing prepared her for the vulnerability in that cry. It was a sound wrapped in mystery, one that spoke of pain and hope all at once. It unsettled the stillness, carving a hollow in the heavy quiet that filled the rooms like dust. When the millionaire spoke of the child, his voice was low, careful, but beneath it lay something harder, something sharp and unyielding. His eyes, usually unreadable, flashed briefly with a coldness that made the air between them chill. There was a tension there, a line drawn in silence that neither dared to cross. She saw the tight clench of his jaw, the faint tremor of his fingers, of a storm held just beneath the surface. Her own heart wavered between fear and curiosity. What was this child, so fragile and silent, that could make a man of such power shrink away like a shadow? What had she truly been hired for? The weight of that question settled deep in her bones, heavier than the grand chandeliers hanging above, heavier than the polished floors beneath her feet. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something unsaid to spill into the air. Every creak of the floorboard, every flicker of candlelight, felt charged with unspoken secrets. She moved carefully through the hallways, her steps measured, as if afraid to disturb the fragile balance of the house. The baby's cry echoed faintly in the distance, drawing her toward a door she had not yet dared to open. Her thoughts swirled with doubt and wonder. Was she meant to soothe this silent ache, to break the heavy quiet that surrounded the child? Or was she a mere bystander, trapped in a story she did not yet understand? The questions gnawed at her, pulling her deeper into a world where wealth and sorrow were intertwined like tangled roots. Beneath the mansion's marble floors, the millionaire's eyes met hers again, colder now, guarded as if he were shielding not just the child, but himself from something unbearable. She realized then that the silence she had stepped into was more than just the absence of sound. It was a fortress built from grief and fear, a silence that had to be guarded at all costs. Yet, beneath that impenetrable exterior, she sensed a flicker of something fragile and unspoken hope, buried beneath layers of pain. It was as if the baby's cry was not only a call for comfort, but a thread pulling them all toward an uncertain future. She took a slow, steady breath, feeling the weight of her new reality settle around her like a heavy cloak. In that moment, the mansion transformed. No longer just a house of cold stone and distant echoes, it became a fragile cradle of secrets, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And as the baby's cry echoed softly through the night, she understood that her role here was far more than she had ever imagined. She was not just a servant in a stranger's home, she was a witness to a silence that begged to be broken. The nursery door stood before her like a silent sentinel, its polished wood gleaming faintly under the dim glow of the hallway light. She reached out, fingers trembling, but the cold brass knob refused to turn. Locked, firmly, deliberately locked. A barrier not just of wood and metal, but of secrets carefully guarded within these walls. The mansion around her seemed to grow heavier, shadows deepening in the corners, as if the very air whispered warnings she couldn't ignore. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a heartbeat in the silence, amplifying the tension that wrapped around her like a thick fog. Behind that closed door lay something the millionaire wanted, hidden, something precious, fragile, and dangerous. Her eyes darted toward him, standing stiffly nearby, his expression unreadable. When she dared to meet his gaze, a chill ran down her spine. His voice broke the heavy quiet low, controlled, and sharp. "Don't get involved." Those 3 words carried more weight than any chain. They were a command, a warning, a plea, all wrapped into one. Yet, inside her, a fierce storm was brewing, a clash between the caution, bred by years of hardship, and the restless curiosity that gnawed at her soul. The locked door became a symbol of everything unspoken, a riddle begging to be unraveled. She felt the pull of that hidden room like a magnet, drawing her closer with every heartbeat. What was it that needed protection so fiercely? What shadows lurked behind that door, concealed from the world? The millionaire's stern warning echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the delicate line she walked between obedience and defiance. The halls around them were silent witnesses, draped in velvet, shadows and heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten stories. Light flickered from distant sconces, casting long wavering shapes that danced like ghosts along the walls. In this house, every step seemed measured, every breath weighed down by the secrets it tried to hold at bay. Her hands clenched into fists. At her sides, the tension coiling inside her like a tightly wound spring. To obey meant safety, predictability, a life confined within the narrow walls of servitude. But to ignore that locked door, to turn away from whatever lay behind it, felt like surrendering a piece of herself, denying the silent cries she sensed. Hidden beyond, the millionaire's face softened for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, a crack in his stoic armor before his features hardened again, as if steeling himself against a past too painful to share. In his eyes, she saw shadows of loss and fear, walls built not just around the nursery, but around his own heart. She swallowed hard, the taste of iron sharp on her tongue, and took a cautious step back. The battle within her raged quietly but fiercely, a war between the instinct to protect and the need to uncover truth. Behind those closed doors lay a secret that could change everything, and somewhere deep inside, she knew that one day she might have to decide whether to keep that secret or let it shatter the silence forever. At the stroke of midnight, the mansion transformed. The grand halls, so imposing by day, now became a labyrinth of shadows and half-heard sounds. She lay awake, the quiet weight of darkness pressing down, when suddenly soft footsteps, barely a whisper, stirred the stillness. They moved like ghosts across the polished floors, careful, deliberate, as if trying not to wake the very walls. Then came the voices, low, hushed, and urgent, threading through the silence like fragile threads of a hidden story. Words she could not quite catch, promises or warnings carried on breath, so soft it seemed the night itself dared not interrupt. Each syllable was a fragment, a puzzle piece slipped between the cracks of this vast, silent house. Her heart hammered in her chest, a frantic rhythm that clashed with the delicate quiet. Fear and curiosity wrestled within her. To move, to listen, to stay hidden, its choice carried weight. The fragile world of the baby, protected behind locked doors and secrets, depended on silence. Yet, the murmurs spoke of dangers, of stories, untold, that she could no longer ignore. She pressed herself against the cold wall, the chill seeping through her thin clothes, grounding her in the moment. Her breath came shallow and steady, a desperate effort to keep calm in a night charged with unseen tension. Every creak, every whispered word, felt like a thread pulling her deeper into the mansion's hidden past. Outside her window, the moon cast pale light that barely touched the darkness inside, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Shadows danced and shifted with each passing moment, mirroring the turmoil inside her. She wondered who walked these halls, friends or foes, memories or ghosts, and what they sought in the dead of night. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments she overheard, secrets of love and loss, protection and pain, woven tightly into the silence that filled the rooms. She thought of the baby, so vulnerable and unaware, and of the man whose cold exterior masked a heart burdened with fear. The night stretched on, endless and heavy, as the whispers faded into the distance. Yet their echo remained, a haunting melody that settled deep within her soul. She realized then that her place in this house was no longer just to serve, but to listen, to guard, and perhaps to understand the story whispered in the night. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, she closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength for the uncertain days ahead. The mansion's silence had been broken, and with it, the fragile threads of a new beginning. In the quiet sanctuary of the nursery, a rare moment unfolded, a fragile crack in the fortress of stone that the millionaire had built around himself. She moved gently, her hands soft and steady, as they tended to the baby's delicate needs. The room, bathed in the golden glow of a fading afternoon, seemed to hold its breath. From the doorway, he watched. The sharp lines of his face, usually carved in stern resolve, softened ever so slightly. It was a smile unlike any she had seen before, brief, hesitant, and almost reluctant to surface, a silent admission that beneath the armor of wealth and authority lay a man weighed down not by power, but by something far heavier, pain. His eyes, usually sharp and unyielding, flickered with a vulnerability that whispered of countless battles fought in shadows. The weight of loss and loneliness pressed upon him like the walls of the mansion itself, vast and unyielding. In that fleeting smile, she glimpsed the human beneath the facade, a soul, burdened by memories too heavy to bear. Openly, the air between them shimmered with quiet understanding, a delicate bridge built from shared moments of care and silent recognition. As she cradled the baby close, the man's stern exterior gave way, if only for a heartbeat, revealing the tender heart that had been hidden behind years of grief and isolation. The room's warm light wrapped around them like a fragile cocoon, a brief reprieve from the cold distance that usually defined their world. In that suspended moment, time slowed, and the harsh edges of their reality softened into something almost gentle. She felt it too, the subtle shift, the unspoken connection that transcended words. The mansion's silence, once oppressive, now held a fragile hope, a quiet promise that beneath even the hardest surfaces, there is room for healing, for trust, and for the courage to let down walls. And so, in the stillness of that afternoon, as shadows lengthened and the day edged toward dusk, a rare and precious glimpse of vulnerability was gifted, a small light breaking through the darkness. Fragile, but the morning sun crept through the high windows, spilling golden light across the nursery floor. Dust motes floated like tiny stars in the beams, swirling gently with the rhythm of the quiet room. The girl moved softly, her hands adjusting a small blanket, her eyes always drifting to the baby lying peacefully beneath it. The house was unusually still, no footsteps echoing in distant halls, no murmurs behind closed doors, just silence, deep and lingering. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like waiting. She reached for a wooden rattle, worn smooth at the edges, and gave it a gentle shake. The soft clack broke the quiet, and the baby's gaze followed the sound. Curious, watchful, for a moment, nothing happened. Then, something changed. It was subtle at first, a twitch of tiny lips, a sudden, curious sparkle in the baby's eyes, and then a laugh, light, delicate, but unmistakable, a sound so pure it cut through the mansion's silence. Like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, it rang out, not loud, not demanding, but filled with something that had never truly touched these walls before. Joy. She froze, as if afraid to move and break the spell. Her heart stilled, her breath caught. It was the kind of sound that rewrote the air around it, softening everything it touched. The laugh came again, higher, fuller now, bubbling from the tiny chest like a spring long frozen, finally set free. She felt it before she understood it, a warmth blooming slowly in her chest, unfamiliar, but deeply welcome. It spread through her ribs, up her throat, into her eyes. It was hope, rising gently, tenderly, as if asking permission to stay. The baby laughed again, and with it, the room seemed to shift. The cold walls no longer pressed so tightly. The shadows softened. Even the silence changed from something oppressive to something expectant, alive. She looked down at the child, whose tiny hands reached for the air, as if trying to catch the joy floating between them. A quiet smile formed on her lips. It wasn't forced or polite. It rose naturally, like morning mist on a warm field, soft and real. She hadn't smiled like this in a long time, not from duty, not from habit, but from something deeper. In the hallway, footsteps paused. She turned, sensing a presence behind her. The millionaire stood there, still as a statue, his gaze fixed on the child. The laughter reached him too. It stopped him, and in his face she saw confusion, then wonder, as if he, too, had forgotten that such sounds could exist. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The only sound was the baby's laughter, dancing between them like light on water. Then, without a word, he stepped back into the shadows, but she stayed. She leaned closer to the baby, whispering something only the two of them would ever understand. A promise, a thank you, or maybe just a breath shared between two souls who had, in that moment, brought life into stillness. The laughter faded slowly, giving way to soft coos and a sleepy sigh, but its echo lingered, settling into the corners of the mansion, into the girl's chest, into the quiet cracks that grief had once carved wide open. For the first time since her arrival, the house didn't feel like a prison. It felt like something else, something beginning. And all it had taken was a laugh. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that hung heavy with golden light and the subtle creak of a settling house. The girl moved through the study with her usual care, dusting shelves lined with leather-bound books whose titles whispered of forgotten worlds. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and worn leather, a quiet kind of memory embedded into every surface. She opened a drawer in the corner desk, its wood swollen from years of stillness. It groaned softly, as if reluctant to give up what it held. Inside were mundane things: fountain pens, a faded watch, a single pressed flower butt. Tucked beneath them was something fragile, an envelope, yellowed and soft at the edges, its seal long broken. She hesitated. Then, with careful fingers, she unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting inside slanted and urgent, as if each word had once raced from a trembling hand. Time had smudged the ink in places, but the story remained painfully clear. The letter was not addressed to her, but it felt as though it had waited just for this moment, for these hands. It spoke of a woman, her voice alive in the lines, who had once filled these holes with laughter, a woman who had loved deeply and been betrayed quietly. The words told of a child born into uncertainty, a promise broken, a trust shattered by silence. As she read, her breath slowed. The weight of the millionaire's coldness began to make sense, not as cruelty, but as armor. Beneath his stern commands and distant eyes was a man scarred by loss, a man who had held too tightly to the pieces of something once beautiful, only to watch them fall apart. The letter ended with a sentence that echoed like a prayer: "If he cannot forgive, let someone else love in our place." Her hands trembled. She folded the letter slowly, reverently, as if folding a part of his soul. The paper crinkled like a quiet sigh. When she slipped it back into the drawer, something inside her had already shifted. This house was not just a place of shadows and silence. It was a sanctuary for grief, a museum of a love that had broken under its own weight. And she, once hired as nothing more than a caretaker, now found herself holding something far more fragile than a child. She was a keeper of wounds. The realization settled deep within her. Her presence in this mansion was not accidental. She had been brought here, unknowingly, to bear witness to a pain buried too long, to give it a name, a breath, a path to healing. She moved through the study with a new kind of reverence, no longer cleaning round the ghosts, but walking among them. The light shifted on the floor, soft and dappled, like memories trying to find their way home. Later, she passed him in the hall, the millionaire, his expression unreadable as always. But this time, her gaze didn't lower. She met his eyes gently, quietly, not with accusation or pity, but with understanding. He paused, just for a moment, then he turned away. But she knew he had felt it, that subtle change, the soft, unspoken truth that someone now knew the story behind his silence. The walls around her no longer felt like barriers. They felt like pages, waiting to be read, understood, forgiven. And as she returned to the nursery, where the baby slept beneath soft blankets, she felt the invisible thread tying past and present, silence and sound, pain and hope braiding itself quietly between them all. And she carried it with her, not as a burden, but as a promise. The days unfolded slowly, like pages in a book no one dared to read aloud. In the mansion's quiet rhythm, there were no grand gestures, no confessions or declarations, only glances, silences, and the passing of time marked by small, unspoken things. In the nursery, where the light filtered gently through sheer curtains, the girl moved with quiet purpose. Her hands were steady now, no longer unsure. Her footsteps had learned the rhythm of this place, the way the old floor creaked in kindness, rather than warning, the way the baby stirred only at certain sounds. It was a language, silent and sacred, that no one had taught her. The baby watched her, with eyes wide and impossibly deep. The child followed her every motion. There was trust there, not forced, not assumed, but earned in the quiet spaces between bottles and blankets, between soft lullabies hummed under breath, and late-night vigils where she stayed by the crib, unmoving, while the rest of the house slept behind locked doors. She never spoke much. Words, she had learned, often fell short. What they shared needed no translation. A simple glance, a hand gently brushing a cheek, a smile offered not for show, but in quiet gratitude. These became their conversations, moments, stitched together not with speech but with presence. In the evenings, when the house grew dim and shadows stretched long across the walls, she would sit beside the crib, one hand resting on the edge, the other folded gently in her lap. The baby would stir, eyes fluttering open just enough to find her there, watching, waiting, still. That small glance, that moment of recognition, became everything. It wasn't love in the way stories told. It was something quieter, sturdier, a bond shaped by consistency and calm, by the girl's steady presence in a life already marked by absence. She didn't try to fix anything. She didn't try to replace anyone. She was simply there, day after day, hour after hour, and in that stillness, trust bloomed. Sometimes, while the baby slept, she would trace shapes in the air with her fingers, little arcs and circles just above the child's chest, like a secret dance meant only for them. Other times, the baby would reach up, fingers curling gently around hers, eyes wide with wonder and the innocent certainty that this hand would always be there. She found herself changing. To dot her thoughts became slower, quieter. The fear that had once clung to her like damp clothing began to ease, replaced by a steadier calm. She no longer jumped at every sound. The mansion's silence no longer felt oppressive. It became a kind of shelter, fragile, yes, but real. A place where things didn't need to be said to be understood. And through it all, the millionaire remained. Distant, his presence felt more in absence than in action. But she began to understand that even he was watching, quietly, testing the silence, unsure whether it could hold the weight of healing. He never interrupted their time. Perhaps, in some quiet corner of himself, he recognized the bond forming in the nursery, and chose not to break it. There was a moment, brief and wordless, when she lifted the baby from the crib, cradled him close, and for the first time, he nestled into her shoulder without hesitation. His tiny hand gripped the fabric of her sleeve, and his breath steadied. No fuss, no fear. Just trust. She stood there, unmoving, holding more than just a child. She was holding a promise, delicate, unspoken, but deeply understood. The house around them seemed to pause. Even the air held still, as if honoring something rare. And in that long, quiet moment, without a single word spoken, a bond was sealed. It began with the sound of gravel crunching beneath unfamiliar tires, slow, deliberate, unwelcome. The girl stood by the nursery window, her arms wrapped loosely around herself, watching as a sleek, black car came to a stop just beyond the iron gate. It sat there for a moment, motionless, as though deciding whether to enter. Then the gate creaked open. She felt it then, like a shift in the air, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from quiet, but from something waiting to break it. The car pulled into the circular drive, its black surface reflecting the overcast sky, as if it carried the storm inside it. A tall man stepped out, dressed too neatly, moving too confidently. He didn't look around and wonder the way most visitors did. He looked like he already knew what waited inside. The girl's hands tightened on the WINDOWSILL. By the time she descended the stairs, the stranger was already in the foyer, shaking the rain from his coat. The millionaire stood across from him, rigid, unsmiling, their eyes locked, and in that brief exchange something passed between them. History, hostility, old scars. "I wasn't expecting you," the millionaire said flatly. "You never do." The man replied, voice smooth, a touch amused. The girl lingered at the edge of the room, the baby monitor clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't know who the man was, but the change in the house was immediate. The light felt colder, the walls seemed to close in, listening, bracing. The millionaire didn't introduce her. He didn't look at her at all, but the visitor did briefly, curiously, with eyes that flicked over her, as if trying to place her within some invisible puzzle. And then he smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just enough to unsettle. The girl stepped back into the shadows. For the rest of the day, the house shifted. On its axis, doors opened and closed. Voices rose behind locked doors. She heard fragments of conversations, names she didn't know, regrets spoken like weapons, money, legacy, custody. That word stayed with her. She found herself checking on the baby more than usual, her hand resting on his small chest, just to feel the rise and fall, the warmth of his skin, the proof that he was still here, still hers to protect. By nightfall, the visitor was still in the house. The millionaire no longer moved through the halls like a statue. He paced, he drank, he stared out windows for long stretches, his jaw set, his silence louder than ever. In the nursery, the girl sat in the dim glow of the lamp, the baby nestled in her arms. She hummed a tune she barely remembered, just to fill the space. But her thoughts raced dots. She didn't know who the stranger was, not yet. But she knew what his presence meant. Danger. Not the kind that came with raised voices or open threats, but the quiet kind. The kind that slipped through cracks and unsettled everything. It touched the fragile peace they had built through glances, through silences, through the soft bloom of trust was at risk. The mansion, once simply strange and cold, now felt like a place under siege. She glanced at the closed door, then down at the baby. Whatever was coming, it was already inside, and it had come for more than a visit. It began with a cough, sudden and far too small for how much fear it caused. She had just laid the baby down for his nap, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead, when his tiny body shuddered. Then came another cough, raspier, like something inside was tightening. She paused, heart stalling in her chest. His skin felt warmer than it should, too warm. By evening, the fever had risen. His breathing grew labored. He whimpered instead of cried. She tried everything she could, cool cloths, warm arms, lullabies, whispered against his burning skin, but nothing helped. The mansion, so large and echoing, felt suddenly suffocating. Every creak of its bones mocked her helplessness. At midnight, she stood outside the millionaire's study, pounding on the heavy door. "Please," she cried. "Something's wrong." With him, the door opened slowly. He looked as he always did, composed, cold, but something flickered behind his eyes when he saw her face. Or maybe it was what he heard, the desperate wheeze of the baby through the monitor clutched in her hand. "He needs a doctor," she said, voice trembling. "He needs to leave this house." "No." His tone was final. Her breath caught. "He's not breathing right. He's barely responding." "I said no," he snapped. "He stays." "Why?" she screamed. "You don't care about him. You won't hold him. You barely look at him. You barely look at him. Why are you keeping him here?" Silence. His eyes were steel. For a second, she thought he might raise his voice, might lash out, but instead, he turned away. The world outside is worse. Not for him, she said, softly now, not like this. She expected him to argue, to threaten, but he only stood there, hands clenched at his sides, as if bracing against a truth he didn't want to hear. I'm taking him, she whispered, with or without your permission. He looked at her, then really looked, not with anger, but with a grief that startled her. And if you do, he said quietly, don't bring him back. She didn't respond. She turned, ran to the nursery. The baby was hotter now, his chest fluttering like a moth against a flame. She bundled him in a blanket, holding him tight, whispering that he'd be okay, that she wouldn't let anything happen. She didn't stop to pack. She didn't stop to think as she reached the front door. She half expected him to be there, blocking the way, but it was empty. Only the soft hum of the house watched her go. The night outside was thick with mist, the gravel wet beneath her shoes. She made it to the gate, heart pounding, breath coming in panicked bursts. Somewhere behind her, the mansion stood like a sleeping beast, ancient, watching, waiting. She didn't look back. The child needed air. He needed light. He needed a way. And for the first time since entering that house, she knew with terrifying certainty, so did she. There are rooms in the mansion that no one enters. Rooms the dust has claimed, where time drips like candle wax low. Silent, irreversible. It begins with a sound, the echo of a piano key, struck by accident or memory, drifting down a hallway long untouched. And suddenly, the walls remember. Years ago, before the silence took hold, this place was filled with laughter. Not loud or boisterous, but warm, intimate. The kind of laughter that builds between two people who believe they've been chosen by fate. He hadn't always been this way, the man with ice behind his eyes. He once loved, deeply, a woman with eyes like morning light and hands that painted joy into ordinary things. She moved through his life like spring breaking through winter. And for a while, he let her melt him. He gave her the keys to everything, his home, his future, his trust. But love, as it often does, asked more of him than he was ready to give. And when the day came to choose between fear and vulnerability, he hesitated. One night, the argument rose like a storm, words that couldn't be taken back. A door slammed, her silhouette disappearing down the marble steps, a suitcase in hand. He told himself she'd return, that pride would cool and forgiveness would bloom. But instead came a phone call, an accident, no survivors. And with her gone was their unborn child. The silence that followed was not just grief, it was a scream buried under stone. He shut the doors, he sold the piano, he built walls higher than the mansion itself. He trusted no one, not even himself. Years passed, but the wound never closed, only shifted, growing sharper when no one watched. And then, one morning, the letter arrived, yellowed edges, a scent of lavender still clinging to the paper, her handwriting. Words written before the end meant for him. If anything happens to me, promise you'll protect what remains of us. He read it once, then again, and again, until the ink blurred through tears he would never admit to. The baby came days later, swaddled, quiet, eyes wide and searching. Not hers, not quite his. A child born of a choice she made, a truth she never got to tell him. He didn't ask questions, didn't want to know the father, didn't care, he simply obeyed. But protection, to him, meant isolation, keeping the baby behind locked doors, far from accidents, far from betrayal, far from love. His grief became a cage, and the baby its prisoner. Each cry reminded him of what he lost, each smile of what he didn't deserve. And now, as footsteps echo through the hall again, as laughter dares to return, quiet and cautious, his rage flares like a wounded animal. He sees the nanny's gaze, soft and unafraid. He sees the baby reaching for a world beyond these walls, and fear coils tighter in his chest, not because he doesn't care, but because he does too much, and that love feels like a blade. He tells himself it's for the child's safety, that the world is cruel, that strangers betray, that fate always takes what he loves. But beneath that armor is a truth he refuses to say aloud. He's terrified of breaking a promise, and even more terrified of keeping it, because to protect this child, truly protect him, he'd have to open the door, let the world in, let her in. He stands at the window as dusk settles. Shadows stretch across the garden, bending like memories. The child's laughter rings out from the nursery. And for just a moment, the man closes his eyes and lets it echo. It sounds like hope. It sounds like her. There's a kind of stillness that only comes at nightfall, when the chandeliers dim and the walls seem to exhale. The mansion, so grand by day, folds into itself after dark, its opulence reduced to quiet corners, low light, and forgotten warmth. That's when he sits by the fire. Every evening, same chair, same glass of untouched whiskey. His eyes follow the flames like they're trying to show him something. But the past never appears the same way twice. Tonight, something is different. The house feels softer. The baby is asleep upstairs. The girl, the one who came from nothing and now holds the child as if it were her own. She doesn't leave. She lingers, and he lets her. They don't speak at first. The silence between them is not heavy. It's familiar, like two strangers watching the same memory from opposite sides of a window. Then he says it. Not a command, not a warning, just a name. Hers. She turns, and what follows is not a monologue, not a practiced speech or some dramatic unraveling. It's quieter than that, more dangerous. It's truth. He speaks in fragments, a lifetime of words, condensed into pauses and sighs. He doesn't look at her when he says it, he stares at the fire. Do you know what I fear most? His voice is low, too low for a man who's built his world on being heard. Not death, not scandal, not loneliness. I've survived all those. He swallows hard. The fire reflects in his eyes, and for a moment, he doesn't look like a millionaire. He looks like a man who lost too much and pretended it didn't matter. I'm afraid. The words catch. He tries again. I'm afraid the world will take him, just like it took her. The girl doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. He continues. He talks about the day the letter arrived, how his hands shook for the first time in decades, how he read her words over and over, looking for a loophole, a way out, a sign that it wasn't real, but it was. He talks about the day the baby arrived, how he almost didn't open the door, how he thought maybe if he ignored it, the past would remain buried, but the baby cried, and the cry sounded just like her, so he took him in, not because he was ready, but because he wasn't. He says he tried to raise the child the only way he knew how, with silence, with rules, with fear, because love, to him, had always meant loss. And then he looks at the girl, really looks, his eyes so sharp, so guarded are suddenly glass. You made him laugh, he whispers. You taught him to reach for things, for people. I've been trying to keep him safe, but maybe I've just been keeping him alone. There's a pause so long it almost becomes a goodbye. Then, the softest thing he's ever said, I don't know how to be what he needs. He waits for judgment, for mockery, for the girl to remind him that money can't parent, but she says nothing. She simply walks to the fire, takes the seat beside him, and listens, not out of pity, but understanding, because she too knows what it's like to be afraid of love, to fear it like a flame, beautiful, warm, and capable of burning everything you are. And for the first time, they sit together, not as employer and servant, not as stranger and guest, but as two people who have been broken open by the same child. Above them, the house does not creak, the wind does not howl, even the fire dares not interrupt. It is not peace, not yet, but it's the closest either of them has ever come. You'd think a place so vast, with corridors that echo your every breath, would swallow rebellion before it ever began, but it starts in silence, the kind of silence that wraps itself around your spine and makes you stand a little straighter. That settles in your lungs when you realize you can no longer look away. That's the silence I carried with me the night I made my decision. The baby had stopped crying hours ago, not from comfort, but from exhaustion. His fever hadn't broken. His little body burned beneath layers of blankets, as if fighting the cold this mansion never seemed to feel. The doctors were denied. He said it was nothing, that children get sick, that fresh air would only make it worse. But I'd seen this before, in a different house, a different child, and a funeral that smelled of lilies and regret. I wasn't going to bury another so I sat in the nursery, watching his tiny chest rise and fall, and something hardened in me. Not anger, not even grief, something quieter, a vow. I would fight for him, not with fists, not with shouting, but with presence, with patience, with love loud enough to break the rules, without ever saying a word. That was the night I stopped waiting for permission. I started opening windows, letting sunlight in, even when he demanded the drapes stay drawn. I read stories aloud, not just in the baby's room, but in the halls, so the silence had something to chase. I left notes under the cook's door: soups for fever, herbs for strength. She never replied, but the meals changed, warmer, softer. I refused to cower, even when he looked at me with eyes that said, "Know your place," because I had tug, and now I was choosing a new one. The staff noticed first, the way I walked through the halls like they belonged to someone worth protecting, how I no longer bowed my head when he passed. The house noticed too. The chill began to retreat. The dust didn't settle so easily on forgotten books. Even the chandelier seemed to burn a little brighter at dusk. He didn't confront me right away. That wasn't his way, but I could feel his disapproval like a shadow at my back, taller every day. Until one evening, as I cradled the baby in the library, humming a lullaby I barely remembered learning, he entered. No words, just footsteps and silence. I didn't rise, didn't flinch. I kept singing. His hand gripped the back of a leather chair, his knuckles white. "He's getting better." That was all I said. A statement, not a question, not a request. He said nothing, but he didn't walk away. That was the beginning. He watched more, barked less, still rigid, still drowning in a grief he wore like armor. But cracks had begun to form. Once, I caught him lingering at the nursery door, just outside the glow of the nightlight. Another time, I heard him laugh, quiet and brief, when the baby smeared porridge on my apron. He never acknowledged it, but the mansion did. It no longer felt like a mausoleum. It began to breathe. I never staged a revolution, never raised my voice or packed a suitcase, but each quiet act was a strike of flint against stone, each gentle defiance a flame. And in the dark, cold heart of this forgotten palace, something was catching fire, not to destroy but to warm. Heal. To make room for a future, even if he couldn't see it yet, even if it meant I'd be the only one standing. When it all came crashing down, because some children are worth the fall, and I would rather go down fighting than live in a world where his laughter never grew loud enough to echo. There's a kind of quiet that only exists just past midnight, not silence, but pressure, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to go wrong. That's when I slipped out. The baby was asleep. Finally, the fever had broken, sweat clinging to his curls like a fragile prayer. I left the window open to crack fresh air, just like I promised him, and then I ran. Past the statues that watched with hollow eyes, past the hedge maze that always felt a little too alive, past the gate I'd sworn never to cross. I didn't know who he was, not really, but the letter was clear. Come alone. Come now. Come if you want answers. I'd found it tucked beneath the baby's crib. No name, no signature, just a time and a promise. So I followed it, because there are questions that haunt you, louder than any threat, and because fear only wins if you let it. He waited beneath the old willow tree at the edge of the estate, face obscured by shadow, hands buried in the pockets of a coat that didn't belong to this century. "You came," he said, his voice rough like gravel underfoot. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Trust is a currency too easily stolen. "I worked for him once," he said, nodding toward the mansion behind me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Long before the child, before the grief turned him into stone, I studied him, his stance, the way his fingers twitched near his side. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't safe either. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He chuckled, soft but bitter. "Want nothing, but I thought you should know the truth." And then he told me about the will rewritten in secrecy, about a name the baby must never speak aloud, about a family the millionaire pretends no longer exists, and about the men who'd rather see the child disappear than inherit the fortune waiting in the dark. "The fever," he whispered, "was no accident." My stomach dropped. The night grew colder. "You're lying," I said, because I had to, but the way he looked at me, like someone who'd seen too much and survived too little, made it harder to believe myself. "I buried the last girl who got too close," he said. "Don't make me bury you." And just like that, the pressure snapped. I stepped back. He didn't follow. "There's a number," he said. "A lawyer, buried in the garden under the birth bath, left corner. Don't wait too long." I turned, walked away without another word. Because if I stayed, I'd start to believe him. And if I believed him, I'd never be able to look the baby in the eyes again without seeing the shadows crawling toward his crib. Back at the mansion, the wind had picked up. The nursery window banged softly against its frame. He didn't wake. I sat by his side until dawn, watching, waiting, listening for footsteps that never came. The stranger had planted a seed, poison or truth I didn't know yet, but it had taken root, and in the quiet, something inside me shifted again. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. And this time, I wouldn't wait for permission to protect him, because the mansion may have been his cage, but I was no longer its prisoner. And if the past was coming to collect its debt, it would have to go through me first. The mansion had always been a fortress, silent, grand, unmoving. Its marble halls soaked in a stillness that felt older than memory, like time had paused to hold its breath between velvet curtains and gold-rimmed mirrors. Here, every step echoed like a question. Every room held secrets too proud to whisper, and she had learned how to survive within its hush, how to smile without trusting, how to belong without ever truly being welcomed. But even fortresses fall, and it never starts with a scream. It starts with a whisper. The betrayal came softly, not with knives or poison, but with a few words spoken too late. The man she had trusted, his voice always steady, his presence always near, was the one who let the truth unravel. It wasn't rage she felt at first. It was silence, a ringing kind of silence, the kind that rushes into your ears when something precious breaks inside you. He didn't flinch when he said it, didn't even look at her, as if the truth was just another task, another file in a drawer long sealed shut. He had known all along about the rewritten documents, about the hidden accounts, about the quiet arrangement that ensured she'd never inherit more than a shadow. He had helped build the illusion of safety, and now he stood there, watching the fire he lit reflect in her eyes. The millionaire, once untouchable, untamed, was slipping, losing control one quiet detail at a time, not because the world was attacking him, but because the ones inside his circle had already drawn their lines in the dust. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a slow collapse. The way a door closes just a second too late. The way someone avoids your eyes when the truth finally stands in the room with you. She didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she walked the halls differently. Not as a guest, not even as a survivor, but as someone who knew the war had already begun, and the battlefield was built from silk drapes and silver forks. She could feel the mansion shifting, not physically, emotionally. The air no longer welcomed her. The paintings seemed colder. The staff, quieter. Trust had been a fragile thread stretched too far, and now everything felt loose. She remembered the way the ally used to stand behind the millionaire, firm, faithful, always 5 steps behind but never far from his shadow. Now she could see it clearly, the way loyalty was currency in this place, and betrayal just another form of investment. Evenings grew longer. The clocks seemed to tick slower in that silence. She searched for anchors, things that hadn't been touched by the rot, but even the nursery felt different now. The crib, the soft lullaby that once played on repeat. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. She wasn't angry, not yet. That would come later, when memory and understanding had sharpened enough to wound. For now there was only clarity, cold, still, sobering clarity. The man she had trusted, the one who had once handed her tea with shaking hands the night of the accident, was part of the machinery that planned her undoing. He hadn't created the lie, but he had oiled its wheels, and worse, he had smiled while doing it. Betrayal doesn't ask for forgiveness. It doesn't knock before entering. It just arrives, uninvited, dressed in familiar clothes. That night, she sat by the fire, not to warm herself, but to remember every conversation, every hand on her shoulder, every warning disguised as kindness, and slowly, she began to see it all differently. Not through the eyes of a girl desperate to belong, but through the gaze of a woman who finally understood what belonging cost. The millionaire's world wasn't crumbling because of outside threats. It was collapsing under the weight of its own lies, and she had been buried beneath them long before the truth surfaced. She wouldn't run, not this time. Betrayal had opened a door, and now that she had walked through it, she would never return the same. The mansion would remember her differently now, not as the quiet girl in the corner, but as the one who had seen too much, and survived anyway. The night pressed close, thick with silence that felt like breath held too long. Shadows stretched across the mansion's walls, familiar but threatening now, as if the house itself had turned against her. The girl stood by the nursery door, her hand resting lightly on the knob, listening for the baby's breathing. soft, faint, still fighting. She had no time. Every hour passed like a tightening noose. The betrayal had changed everything. Safety was an illusion, and trust was now a fractured mirror. The man she once feared had shown her more humanity than the one who smiled in passing. And now, the mansion that once felt frozen in time pulsed with danger. She moved quietly, heart pounding in sync with her footsteps. Each creak of the floorboards felt louder than it should, echoing through the empty halls. Somewhere behind one of those closed doors, eyes watched, waiting. She had felt it all day, paranoia, settling into her skin like damp air. She wasn't sure who to fear most now, the strangers outside, or the familiar inside. In her small room, she laid out what little she could carry: a thin blanket, a bottle of milk, a pacifier with teeth marks etched like memory, the baby's tiny hat. Not enough, never enough, but she wasn't sure they'd even get as far as the road. Still, she packed with care, every item a promise, every fold a whisper of hope. The plan wasn't perfect. It was stitched together with instinct, desperation, and a sliver of faith. But it was hers. She studied the old servants' passage behind the staircase, a forgotten corridor lined with dust and regret. It led to the rear garden, now overgrown and wild, and then to the broken fence, where light from the moon barely reached. No one used it, not anymore. At midnight, the house seemed to hold its breath. The wind hissed through the trees, whispering of things that once were, and things that still might be. She cradled the baby, wrapped snugly against her chest. His tiny hand clutched her shirt, his face pressed against her heartbeat. He trusted her completely, without question, without condition, and that broke her more than anything. Down the hall, a door creaked open. She froze. Voices drifted low, urgent, male, talking about movements, about surveillance, about not letting her out of their sight. Her name was mentioned, once, sharply. She knew then she was running out of time. Sliding into the shadows, she moved. Not fast. Too fast would bring noise. Attention, but steady, determined. Her body shielded the child as they passed the library, the dining hall, the cracked portrait of a family that no longer existed. The old passage welcomed her like a secret. The smell of wood rot and mothballs clung to the air, but she welcomed it. It meant no one else had dared come this way. Her feet knew where to step. She had practiced this in her mind for nights. When she reached the garden door, she paused. The latch had rusted stiff, and for a moment she thought it wouldn't open. Her breath caught, chest rising with panic, but then a click, a shift. The door gave way. Cold air swept in like a silent scream. Outside, the world felt both enormous and impossibly small. Trees loomed like sentinels, and the grass, once manicured, now grew wild and soft. She moved quickly, following the edge of the garden until the jagged gap in the fence came into view. She slipped through, and just like that, the mansion was behind her. She didn't look back. Her shoes sank into the earth as she ran, branches clawing at her dress, the baby stirring but not crying. Ahead was the road. Maybe safety, maybe not, but anything was better than the lies that festered behind stone walls and locked doors. For the first time, the stars looked close enough to touch. Each breath was sharper now, but lighter too. Freedom carried a weight of its own, and she bore it willingly, because escape wasn't just about leaving, it was about choosing. And tonight, she chose life. The wind had changed. What once was a silent mansion, too quiet, too still, now breathed with urgency. The girl could feel it in the floorboards, hear it in the restless creak of the walls. Every heartbeat echoed louder. Every shadow lengthened like a hand reaching out to stop her. She clutched the baby close, swaddled in a blanket too thin for the night. The child stirred in her arms, unaware of the storm gathering outside the nursery walls, unaware that the house they had called home was no longer safe. Down the corridor, the clocks seemed to tick louder than before, each one a reminder that time was not on her side. The plan had been fragile, hastily stitched together with trembling hands and half prayers, and now, as it unfolded, she could feel it fraying at the edges. The door to the servants' stairwell groaned as she opened it. Behind her, silence too complete, too expectant. She didn't look back. There was nothing there for her now, only fear, only the knowing that if she hesitated, even once, everything would collapse. She descended quickly, her breath shallow, the baby pressed tightly to her chest. The air grew colder. The stone steps were damp with the night's moisture. and each footfall echoed like a warning. She had chosen the hour carefully between the guards' rounds, when the house slept and the shadows were thickest. But plans are fragile things, and hope is quieter than footsteps. Downstairs, the back hall stretched before her like a tunnel. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting colors across the marble floor. It would have been beautiful had it not felt so final. The baby stirred again, a soft whimper, not a cry, just a sound. But in the mansion's cavernous hush, it rang out like a flare. She froze. Somewhere above her, a door slammed. The echo traveled like a wave down the staircase, chasing her heart into her throat. They were awake. No more waiting. She began to move, faster now, nearly running. The bundle in her arms grew heavier with every step, not because of weight but because of what it meant. This child wasn't just a charge anymore. He was her purpose, her vow, her fight. She reached the kitchen once, a place of warm bread and quiet laughter. Now, it felt like a trap. She crossed it in 3 long strides, heading for the side door that led to the carriage lane. But the lock jammed. Her fingers trembled as she jiggled the key. Once, twice. Footsteps, heavy, rushed, growing louder. Click. The door opened with a gasp of wind, cold and sharp. She slipped out, the door slamming behind her like a gunshot. Outside, the world was drenched in darkness. The hedges loomed tall and unkind. Gravel crunched beneath her feet as she ran toward the old stable, where the stranger had promised to wait. But the courtyard was empty. No light, no carriage, just silence. She stopped. Her chest rose and fell like waves against a crumbling shore. She had trusted too easily. She had hoped too much. Behind her, the mansion glowed. Windows lit one by one, like eyes opening, and then voices, shouts, a distant call of her name. They were coming. She turned and fled toward the trees, to the hidden gate in the stone wall. The baby whimpered again, louder this time, and she murmured soft sounds, anything to keep him still, to keep him safe. Branches whipped at her face. The ground turned wild beneath her feet, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. She was chasing the edge of something unseen, a life beyond these locked doors, a future not yet stolen. At the wall, she reached behind the ivy, found the latch, pulled. It opened. Freedom. Almost. She stepped through. And then headlights, blinding. Sudden, a car screeched to a halt. Figures stepped out, 2 of them. She froze, every part of her screaming to run, to hide, to vanish. But then, a voice. Low. Calm. Familiar. The stranger. He motioned to her, urgent, but gentle. She hesitated for half a breath, then ran. The car door shut behind her. The baby, now sleeping, nestled against her heart. Tires spun, gravel flew, and behind them, the mansion shrank into the darkness, its secrets locked away. Once more, inside the car, no one spoke. There were no congratulations, no comfort, only the sound of breath, hers, quick and shallow, and the faint hum of the engine, slicing through night. She didn't know where they were going, only that they had left, that they had outrun something cruel, and for now, that was enough. There are nights when time moves differently, when the air holds its breath, when the walls of a home, once silent witnesses, begin to murmur. And on this night, within the quiet grandeur of the mansion, every step feels like a reckoning. She stands in the hallway, the girl who had once entered unsure, nearly invisible. But now, her presence commands the space, not with power, but with purpose. The baby sleeps in the room behind her, unaware of the storm swelling in the corridors beyond. At the heart of the house, the millionaire waits. He sits in the study, a room of dark wood and older regrets. The fireplace glows low, casting trembling shadows across his lined face. The weight of years, of silence, of choices made in secret settles heavy on his shoulders tonight. She enters without knocking. Her steps are steady, yet her heart thunders. She carries not just a plea, but a challenged truth wrapped in defiance, grief tempered by resolve. And though she does not raise her voice, her presence speaks volumes. The air between them thickens. For a moment, they are statues frozen by everything unsaid. But something in her gaze breaks through him. Perhaps it's the fire, or perhaps it's the fear, the quiet fear that he's finally run out of time. He speaks not to command, not to dismiss, but to confess. His voice is softer than she imagined, and older, each word a thread pulled from the fabric of his pain. He speaks of the past, of a woman he once loved and lost, of a child never meant to be hidden, of mistakes made in the name of protection and how protection can sometimes become a prison. She listens, and with every truth revealed, the picture shifts. The coldness she once mistook for cruelty now reveals itself as grief. The silence, as shame, the control, as fear of more loss. But that doesn't undo the damage. It only illuminates it. He looks away. She doesn't, because now she sees the man for what he is, not a villain, not a savior, but a flawed soul, standing on the edge of surrender. And she is no longer just the nanny. She is the mirror he's spent years avoiding, the stranger who dared to care. Her words are few, but they carry weight. She tells him of the baby's laughter, the baby's trust, of quiet mornings where hope bloomed despite the house's shadows, of how love found its way in, quietly, stubbornly, despite every locked door. And then she says what needs to be said, that the child deserves more, that fear cannot parent, that the past must be faced, not buried, and that silence, no matter how noble, is not safety. It's abandonment in disguise. The millionaire's hands tremble. Outside, the wind stirs the trees, as if the world, too, is holding its breath. He stands, slowly, and in his eyes, something shifts. Not just sorrow, not just surrender, but something raw and difficult, acceptance. He takes a step forward, not toward her, but toward the future. And for the first time, the house feels warmer, not because the pain has vanished, but because it's no longer hidden. The truth has left its mark, scars exposed to air, bleeding freely, but ready to heal. She doesn't smile. There's too much left to rebuild for that. But she breathes deeply, like someone surfacing after a long, silent drowning. The confrontation was never about victory. It was about release of guilt, of secrets, of roles long outgrown. And in that quiet aftermath, something new is born, not peace, not yet, but the possibility of it. Later that night, she walks back to the baby's room. The child stirs as she enters, eyes fluttering open. She hums softly, a soundless lullaby. The baby settles, one tiny hand curling into hers. Behind her footsteps, she turns to find the millionaire standing in the doorway, no longer towering, no longer armored, just a man who finally chose to stay. Exchanged no words, they don't need to. Some truths linger better in silence. In the end, this confrontation didn't shatter them. It stripped away everything false, and left behind something painfully, beautifully human. And that, perhaps, is how healing begins. Not with answers, but with the courage to finally ask the right questions. The air is still. The morning sky, soft with pastel light, bleeds into the horizon like a promise not yet spoken. Dew clings to the iron railings of the mansion's terrace, catching the sun like tiny stars, briefly brilliant before vanishing. Beneath that fading sky, they stand to silhouettes shaped not by power or past, but by what they've lost, and what they now dare to hope for. The girl and the millionaire. She, with tired eyes still filled with quiet defiance. He, worn thin by regrets, too heavy for any one man. Between them, no words, just silence, deep, watchful, and more honest than anything they've said. That they have survived the storm. But survival is not peace. It is only the space where new stories might begin. Inside the mansion, echoes of the past still breathe through every hall. The baby's laughter rises faintly from a room once thick with grief. That soundlight, messy, alive, dances down corridors once locked in silence, and in it lies something more than joy. It's a rhythm of healing, of futures daring to form. The girl watches the horizon with a stillness that's not fear, not anymore. It's patience. She understands now. Time is no longer chasing her. It is unfolding beneath her feet. A path not yet paved, but softened by footsteps of those willing to stay. The millionaire's hands rest on the railing, the same hands once clenched in pride and pain. Now, they simply rest, not gripping, not grasping, just open. He has shed his armor, not all at once, but piece by piece through long nights, harsh truths, and the soft rebellion of someone refusing to leave. They are bound now, not by roles or rules, but by something quieter, more dangerous, and more beautiful. Choice, to choose each other, to choose the child, to choose to face what tomorrow brings, not with certainty but with presence. Below them, the grounds stretch wide. The garden once left to wither has begun to sprout. Ivy climbs again, roots dig deep. Life moves where no one invited it, but where someone, silently, kept the soil ready. The mansion is no longer a cage. It is becoming a home, and yet, the world still waits beyond its gates, unwritten, unkind, but not undefective. And the girl knows the road won't be easy. Love, once broken, leaves behind sharp edges. Trust doesn't return like a sunrise. It flickers, hesitates, and must be rebuilt with every gentle gesture. But for the first time, she does not face the unknown alone. The millionaire turns to her, his gaze no longer heavy with ownership, but with recognition. He sees her, not as a savior, not as an employee, but as a woman who stayed, who fought for the child, who changed him not by force, but by simply refusing to stop caring. No grand words pass between them. They don't need them. Their story is not one of epic declarations. It is a quiet unfolding, a gentle resistance against everything they were told they couldn't be. As the morning breaks fully, golden light spills over the edge of the roof, touching their faces. In that moment, everything else fades: grief, betrayal, the ache of all that was lost. What remains is a promise, not in words, but in presence, to show up, to stay, to write the next chapter, even if their hands still tremble. Behind them, the baby's cry cuts through the stillness, familiar, hungry, real, and in that cry, they both find something worth moving toward. Not the end of fear, but the beginning of purpose. They turn together, slowly, without hurry, without panic, because now there is time, there is tomorrow, and though they do not know its shape, they no longer fear its arrival. For in each other, they have found the courage to face the unwritten, and the strength to write it anew.